Hello and welcome to the Mighty Oaks Show. My name is Jeremy Stalnecker. I'm the Executive Director of the Mighty Oaks Foundation. Looking forward to a great show today. I watch a lot of documentaries. I don't have a very exciting life, so when people say, what are you watching? Mostly it's a documentary and probably about something historical and most of the time about war or some aspect of war. And watched an incredible documentary this last week. It's going to be released to the public here, I think in just a couple of days. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the documentary is called Unforgotten, and have the writer, director, producer, and filmmaker, I think, in a lot of, or the guy behind the camera for a lot of it. But you had a team, of course. Darrin Dick is with us, and I just want to talk about this. What an incredible story. You're a great storyteller, and I want to get into, the whole story and why you did it. But tell us your story first. You are the campus pastor at New Spring Church, so involved in ministry. You started in filmmaking, ended up in ministry, and you're doing a bunch of other stuff. Tell us your story and how you got into this and where you are.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for having me on. Very excited. So I'm a Midwestern boy. I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and I always, from a young age, just fell in love with computers and getting my mom's video camera and do all that type of stuff. So when I got ready to graduate high school, I wanted to go into filmmaking. I thought I wanted to work at Pixar, live in LA, do something fun like that. So I went and studied at a school in Savannah, Georgia, and studied film and animation, different things like that. And I always knew I wanted to do something in that. But then also being a Christian, I was involved in the church growing up most of my life. And there was this church up in South Carolina called New Spring Church, and they are a church that has multiple campuses all over the state of South Carolina. And so they had a need for somebody to come in and do a bunch of video content for them. So worked out for me to go jump on board with them and part of the staff, and did that for about a year or two, and then helped build an in-house creative team. That's where I met and developed a lot of the relationships that actually helped me on the film. And then, through that, just kind of the call in my life changed, and God called me into being a pastor. And so still, though, always have a burden. I think great pastors and great ministry is done with a story. That's what I read in the Bible. That's what Jesus did, is he had great stories to tell people, and that's how they could learn more about him. And so in 2011, this is kind of in the film, so I won't share too much, but in 2011, my grandmother passed away, and my grandfather was my last living grandparent, and I knew that he had been in this war, and I knew very little about that. I knew very little about his story. So I had this, arsenal of abilities from school, and then these people that I was working with, through the church, and said, hey, we got to a place like, hey, let's make a documentary about this, and let's film this. And it was really just going to be something small that I did for my family, and it blew up and became a lot bigger. So that's kind of the quick version. But now I've since relocated, and me and my family, we live in Myrtle Beach, and so I'm a pastor down here.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. How did you pastor and make a movie like this at the same time? Because I have not done movie making, but I have done pastoring, and it requires a lot of attention.
I didn't make it all. I mean, it wasn't very low budget.
Yeah.
When I had time in the spare time. So I think somebody asked me the other day, I think 2012 is when I first began the project. Started writing and thinking about it, and did a lot more thinking and talking then than actually putting anything into action.
Sure.
2015, I did a Kickstarter to try to raise money for it. That failed. Still had, support of my wife and people around me, like, hey, let's still make this thing happen. So we did just little shoots at a time. So we went to DC, did some filming, then brought that footage back. And I had time to edit it. Then I was like, you know what? I want to do this other shoot. And we'd go shoot that, come back. So it took several years to make. But yeah, it was definitely, I look back on that and think, yeah, I don't know how I did that, but it happened. So,
hey, talk about some of the people that are involved with you in the film. At the end credits, a lot of people that were involved. Some of, I don't know if you call them outtakes, but the pictures of you guys filming and all the things there. A lot of people, looks like a lot of people are involved in that.
Yeah.
When you do a low budget film, it's got to be a kind of a labor of love for a lot of those folks.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, try to feed people. That's one of the ways people.
Yeah, right.
If we get together, we'll feed you. So all these guys and gals were people that I've done ministry with. So we were in church together, and I was like, hey, this is a project, this is a film that I want to make. Would you guys want to help me? Sometimes some of the ideas I had took a lot of convincing, like when we went to North Carolina and tried to do these reenactments, like that might be cheesy. I don't know about that. And I was like, hey, I think it'll be a good idea. Let's do it. So one of a really good friend of mine named Evan Oliver, we worked together at the church for years. He was the main camera operator, I guess you could say, as far as like a lot of the visuals are from him.
Yeah.
I have a great friend named Cody Breidenbaugh. He and his wife have a interior design / branding company. And so he's the one who came up with the Unforgotten logo and the branding and kind of all the imagery around it. And again, these are just friends. And so people that I knew were very talented that want to help me tell a great story. A good friend of mine named Nick Charalambus, him and his wife helped me sit down and comb through hours of footage and kind of piece together what would become the story. So just kind of shoulder tapping. Like I said, some of those folks, bringing friends on set. Just, hey, I need someone who can fill up sandbags and run sandbags.
Right.
Hey, I need someone who can, there's a guy that worked with us for the church that him and his family love to collect old military weapons. When I found that out, I was like, okay. They had M1 carbines or carbines. I don't know how exactly you say it. All those different stuff. And they had ammunition, so we were able to shoot rounds and do all kinds of stuff for the filming. So, yep.
You don't have a military background.
I do not, no.
So the amount of research that you must have done personally had to have been incredible, I would imagine. You tell a great story, but it's not just a story about your grandfather. It's the Korean War and so many aspects of that. Yeah,
that was one of my fears was, is this like, if the right person watches this and it's like 2 degrees off and it's not accurate. So I feel like I did a lot of research. I watched a lot of old, and some of it's in the film, some old archival stuff. Archive.org has just a database of hours and hours. So I watched a lot of the old, I forget what they called it, it has like a name for it. It was like basically the Army update that week on the news. And so you could watch all those. So I watched as many of those as I could, which were really fascinating to hear what they thought of the war at the time. And then obviously modern, articles and retellings. And then we had everything going on with the Korean War Summit this last year.
Yeah.
So that brought a lot of great new content to surface, like a research. Try to find multiple versions of maps and try to piece battles together and things like that as best as I could. There's still some gaps places, I would imagine, and somebody probably could pick it apart. But I think we did a good job. Yeah. And I got other people to weigh into opinions and things like that as well. But there's a reason it's called the Forgotten War. There's not a ton of stuff on it, but there's enough.
So, man, there's a lot I want to talk about. I've got like 4 pages of questions. We don't have enough time to talk about all of it, but I felt like I'm a student of history. I felt like I understood the Korean War. You definitely, in a relatively short period of time, talked about some things and illuminated things I just had not known or talked about. It's funny because your grandfather, like in a passing comment, mentions MASH. And it's funny when he said that because I thought, you know what, probably most of what I know about the Korean War has to do with what I learned on MASH, which isn't a lot, right?
Yeah.
But why'd you call it Unforgotten? A lot of things you may have talked about different titles. Why'd you settle on that? And why in the process of this did you decide to tell so much of the story of the war and not just the story of your grandfather's involvement in the war?
Yeah. I'm enough of a history nerd, I guess, myself too, a little bit that, growing up, I remember in like 2nd or 3rd grade, we had to do a history project. I remember wanting to do on the Korean War because my grandpa was in it. I remember trying to call him on the phone and get him to talk about it, and he wouldn't tell me much, never have me much. And so
right.
I think as a kid and then growing up my whole life, I was like, why is this thing? It's called the Forgotten War. Like, why is that? Like, why do people talk about this? It's like a big deal. Like my grandpa did the fireworks because of it. Like, what is that about?
Right.
And I don't know, something about just me personally, like going on a journey to hear his side of it, but then historically, and then seeing how those things lined up. Like I was able to find things in research, in history, go find a letter from the exact date that he wrote to my grandma, read that, and then go find photography and archival footage that matched all those things. Yeah. And that was just so fun. It was just exciting. It was cool to see like, no, this isn't like made up stuff. This is like his exact letters. He's talking about MacArthur being replaced by Ridgway.
Yep.
There's news reports about it.
Right.
He has the same opinion as everyone else did in the Army, which is bad call. We don't like this. Right. And so it was cool. Like that stuff was just exciting. It was like, I felt like a reporter, and so that was so fun for me. So I think a couple of things. We called it Unforgotten. Obviously it's called the Forgotten War. So the idea of Unforgotten was, hey, we're going to learn about this war together.
We're going to bring this to light. Yeah.
We're going to bring it to light. So me figuring out about it, but also telling it through the lens of one person's story, because there's so many people that I've talked to, and they say, yeah, my uncle was in the Korean War, or my grandpa was in the Korean War, or my dad was in the Korean War. I'll always ask them, did they ever talk about it? And they say, no, nothing. They wouldn't share anything with me. And so to me, it was like, there's also all these men and women who have all of these stories, all of this hurt, all of this um, you know, for my grandfather, I think he had some shame. I think he had some regret. I think he talks about wrestling with killing people and taking lives. So for 60 some years, those letters that I show in the movie, he never opened those once in 60 some years.
Is that
But
right?
yes, but they still
Wow.
kept them.
Yeah.
So there's just this like
Yeah.
unspoken thing. We don't talk about it. And so to me, it was like this entire generation. And at the end of the film, a lot of people got the chance to honor one of their loved ones or somebody in the, that fought in the war.
Yeah.
And a lot of them say missing in action, killed in action, or they
Yeah.
had to. And so those are stories that when that generation, like when my grandfather dies, if I don't get the opportunity to do this, all that stuff that you watched, you got to experience, his commitment to his family, his commitment to his faith, all that stuff goes with him. And I think there's an opportunity to impact legacy major to document that. So Unforgotten is obviously, the Korean War is one thing, but it goes a lot bigger that, hey, there are stories inside of everybody.
Yeah.
And everybody's walking around with things that we can learn from and we can grow it together from. So question, but
yeah, that was great. Two things. One is people who watch it need to stay and watch the end credits and watch that. I loved seeing the pictures of those folks who served in the Korean War. I liked that the dates were attached to it. And I really liked that a lot of them were pretty recent. These are people who not only were killed in the Korean War, which was a lot of them, there was a lot of folks who, like your grandfather, lived a life after the war and had to carry a lot of this. So that meant a lot to me, because the work that we do here is not the work of helping those who have lost family members necessarily. It's helping those who have left a war and try to rebuild a life and move back or move forward. So I thought that was awesome. But to the earlier part, why have we forgotten the Korean War? We had World War II. On the heels of that, we had the Korean War, which is crazy. Depending on when you think the Vietnam War started, it wasn't that long after the Korean War. We had another major conflict. Why was the Korean War lost in all of that?
Yeah, so I talked about it briefly. It may have been even in one of the deleted scenes that I ended up not putting in the film, but basically it had to do with the media coverage a little bit. So World War II was this, big impactful thing everywhere. At the end of World War II, basically the collective wisdom of our government at the time and most of the world was, okay, ground war is over. Like it's all gone nuclear now. So
right.
Like even like some production of most of our ammunition, weapons, all that stuff stopped for a while because it was like, there's no sense in investing in this. Anything happens again, we know how to use nuclear warfare to kind of, do what we do. And so I think that was like the collective wisdom of military. And then I think that I don't know. I don't know if it just was they weren't able to get news crews on the ground there. I don't know the specifics of it, but I think it probably was similar to Vietnam in that there was a lot of disagreements probably for people on why we're over there, why we're not over there. What does this really mean? What are we actually fighting for? Yeah. Maybe similar to some of the stuff modern day when people talk about Iraq and Afghanistan and, well, we found the terrorists, so now why are we still there? And it was for 5 years they tried to keep peace there. So it's like, well, we've always been over there. And even since the Korean War, there's always been, U.S. and other countries over there. Maybe you know a little more about the military language and things behind that, but I don't know the specifics of why. It just seems to be a thing that wasn't like today. There's things going on all over the world that either the media gets excited about or they don't. At that time, I just don't think for whatever reason the media never really captured it very well. I think there was a lot of mistakes America made, like not having enough ammunition and sending them into the war and underestimating North Korea and China when they entered the war. And so it kind of felt like, MacArthur's plea was like, hey, we're letting our men get slaughtered. Yeah. And we've got to do something about it. So I think maybe there's some things they didn't want people to know. I don't know the specifics, but maybe it was
some fatigue too after World War II and everything people had dealt with. They just didn't want to deal with it anymore.
Right. Vietnam was huge.
Yeah.
And then World War II is huge. And so it's kind of sandwiched between those two as well. So
when I watched, as you started to talk about your grandfather, I thought about my own grandfather who passed away, I think about 5 years ago now. He was in World War II. And again, that was something we all knew that he had been a part of, and he just didn't talk about it. I remember one time as a kid trying to talk to him about that, and he just, he wasn't angry or anything. It just wasn't something that we talked about. So there's a part of me that felt bad that I didn't, try to figure out some of that, but had a great relationship with my grandfather. What was your relationship, or what has your relationship with your grandfather been like?
Yeah.
before this project? Obviously, it had to have been pretty close.
Yeah. Yeah. So he turns 90 next month. He is an awesome man. He since has been remarried, which is cool. And he lives in Windham, Minnesota. He's just a very humble, content guy.
Yeah.
And I love him a whole lot. And so growing up, I guess there was kind of like, if I'm honest, just a little sternness to him. Like he's a military guy, and we knew that.
Right.
And, sometimes like, hey, I'll take my belt off. Like
Right.
rules and things that we followed. And but I always knew that he was a man who loved being in church. He was always a man who loved his family. He never did anything apart from his wife. They did everything together. And he worked really hard. He worked the same job for, I think, like 50 years or something with the gas company he worked with. And so I knew that he was just an awesome man. I didn't know a lot. Like I said, I didn't know hardly anything. It wasn't really until we were close, but we lived in Nebraska. He lived in Minnesota. So we'd see them a couple times a year. They'd come down for things. And, but we weren't, with them all the time.
Right.
But we were very close with them. And I was my mom always joked that I kind of was like him, and I actually play him in the reenactments. So I lost weight and got military fatigues on and cut my hair and did everything.
Yeah.
So, cause I was always told you look a lot like your grandpa, a lot like Harold. So that was fun to get to do that. But he also was really into art, and I went to art school. Like he loved drawing and, woodworking, all that stuff. So I always thought that was neat to we had some of those connections. And so that was fun for me, even diving into that. So when we originally sat down, it was almost a year after my grandma died in 2012. So I originally sat down with him and said, hey, I just want to know more about your life. If you want to talk about the war or not, that's up to you. I'll probably ask you some questions. If you don't want to talk about it, I said, just you and me. Let's sit down. I'm going to set up a little camera and a little microphone, and let's just talk about it. Cause I really, really want to know more about how you and grandma met, and about life growing up. And I do want to know about the war. I want to know, about everything. And so I think maybe something similar in him that was in me was just like, yeah, maybe it is time to talk about it a little bit. And he started opening up a little bit more to his kids, to my mom and, my aunt and uncles. And so that was kind of what, he opened up immediately, almost immediately, as soon as we sat down. And I don't know if it's cause, at this time I'm transitioning into being, more of a pastor, and, that's just something that, I'm gifted at, just asking questions about your life and what's going on with you, and how can I help? And I really did. I want to know what's the stuff he's carrying. And it went immediately from, this is how your grandma met, to then I enlisted in the Army and went to Korea. Yeah. Or not to Korea. Originally he went to Fort Knox, and then New Jersey, and then Washington, then Korea. But he was very resilient, I think, at first, and our relationship has grown a ton through it. Yeah. I'm more proud of him than he's ever been. And, last night he was just thanking me. This is incredible. I don't think he understands probably the scope of it. Yeah. That it's a movie that's being sold everywhere.
Right.
He's just kind of how do I get some DVDs? Cause some of the guys want a DVD.
Right. Right.
So I think he's excited. I think he thinks it's really, and I just kind of, I've always been very gracious with him and asked him hey, are you okay with more people finding out about this? I think you have a great story. I think more people can be touched and blessed by it. It's oh yeah. So we have a great relationship. It's hard now. I live so far away. I haven't seen him for a good bit, but.
How long was your grandfather in Korea? Actually in Korea?
He was there, I think, 14 months, the first 14 months. So from 50 to 51. Yeah.
So one of the kind of fascinating things about veterans, particularly older veterans to me, is that their time in service, generally speaking, is a very small fraction of their lives.
Right.
And yet, as your grandfather told his story, he was telling about things that happened and people that he knew, and not all of it was combat stuff. Some of it was, I knew this guy and we did this thing and we were over here, and you had a hard time emotionally getting through some of that. What is it about combat, at least from your observing this, or your observations, combat and military service and war, I guess, that causes a fraction of a person's life to be so prominent for the rest of their life?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's shared experiences, obviously the trauma, he talked about the film multiple times. That's probably one of the closest time he was to the Lord, because he had to ask constantly, I'm praying for guidance where I need to take my literal next step so I don't get blown up.
Yeah.
So that is, not sleeping at night because afraid of getting your
Right.
throat by the end, that level of stuff. And so I think there is trauma, the shared experiences, the fact that he had to grow up. I mean, a lot of these guys are going over there 18, 19 years old.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, growing up, going to a summer camp or something like that. And I remember some of those relationships because it's just something emotional happened to me that week. And I remember the guy who became my best friend that weekend or whatever, um, I don't know that I have, I'm trying to honestly think now in my life if I have anything that even resembles that. And that's probably would be is like summer camp, or
Yeah.
you're leaving everything, you're having to forge new relationships with whoever you got to rely on. And then they're also fighting for their life.
Yeah.
So I think the trauma is huge, the memories, the faces,
Yeah.
of the guys that they served with. I mean, there's lots of other stuff, that there wasn't in the film. He talks about how in 14 months he had 13 company commanders
Wow.
because these guys would
Wow.
they come, and in a month they didn't get it and they were killed or removed.
Wow.
So I mean, he knows specific details, and it just has a great memory.
Yeah.
So some guys maybe they don't know. Maybe they just don't remember it. Maybe it was blurred out for them or blocked out for them. But I think a lot of them, it is they have to suppress it.
Yeah, it's weird. I have 4 kids, and sometimes I get their names wrong. Like every time I call one of them, right? I can't remember anything, but ask me about something that happened in Iraq, and I can remember, times, moments, everyone that was around. It's crazy how the brain works. But
Wow.
you look at older veterans, and really, I think a lot of them have been carrying that with them, for generations. Yeah, it's fascinating to me. Even watching your grandfather with his Korean War veteran hat, you see older veterans, and they've been married, they've had kids, they've had grandkids, they've worked jobs, they've done stuff, but that's the thing they're proud of, Yeah, it's fascinating. One of the things your grandfather talked about a lot was his faith, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but it was interesting to hear him talk about the war and the fact that he believed when he went there that the war was the right thing at the right time, and he believed in why he was there, why he was going there. I was asked not too long ago how I reconciled my faith going to war with combat and those kind of things, and I gave an answer. I didn't feel like I had to reconcile it because you go to a place like Iraq and you're doing your best to set people free who have been oppressed, and walk through that. And then I think it was 4 days later I watched this documentary, and I heard almost the same thing from your grandfather. There wasn't a conflict. Is that pretty accurate?
He said, yeah, he did. He they even had chaplains that said, hey, you guys are working for the Lord and they're working for the devil. And, I think, as a pastor, I mean, I can speak on this a little bit. I think biblically you can look at where war is kind of a part of the fact that we live in a sinful world, and there's real evil trying to do really evil things. And we know good and evil because we feel that, and we know that's something that is established. So I do think there's something to that. Again, I've never had to pull a trigger that ended somebody's life. And I think that's what he wrestled with the most, is he knew he had to kill somebody or they were going to kill him. He knew that they were the ones that were oppressing these people and fighting for these people that couldn't fight for themselves.
Yeah.
He knew, like, in the moment that was the best decision, but I think he still wrestled with, in that moment in the film, he says that,
yeah,
I don't know how to handle when the Bible says thou shalt not kill, and I was taking people's life. So that's why I'm so excited about this movie, because I know that people can watch it and they can immediately, it can help them. It can help them walk through it and understand, like, hey, war is an awful thing. It's terrible. But if you're gonna, step into that, here's the tool he had. He had a relationship with God, and that's what I love so much about it.
Yeah.
That's why it can help so many people.
One of the interesting things about your grandfather's experience too, to me, was that he was in the Army before the war started.
Correct.
Which, today we look at a lot of folks who enlist in the military knowing that we've been in war for 20 years and that's their story. But his desire to serve was not based on there's a war going on. He just wanted to be someone who served, and that was just a part of who he was.
Yeah.
One of the stories that he tells in there, and I won't tell the story, but talks about being away from kind of the front line of his command and trying to get back. And you do a great job with the American flag, and he talks about the flag for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
and this is, I mean, even this weekend, this is a debate that's constantly going on in our country, and I don't understand why, but what does the flag represent? And
Yeah.
to hear your grandfather talk about it was just, it was one of those like, oh yeah, that's right. We don't worship the flag, but it represents freedom, and it represents those who have paid the price for freedom.
Yeah.
What a great conversation to have with someone who can look back and go, this is not hard to understand.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's especially, I don't know. I think about, I don't want to get too political with it. I think about my upbringing, the life I've had.
Yeah.
I've not wanted for anything.
Right.
I don't know what it's like to live in a country where I could have my hands cut off for stealing, or where I'm going to be oppressed because I go to a worship service, or, we just don't get that. And so I think a lot of it is, ignorance on both sides. I also don't understand when people are disrespecting the flag or doing things or kneeling or different things like that, what they're struggling with. They're
Right.
not I'm not in the same,
Sure.
I didn't grow up the same as them. So I don't know. I think that, nobody would disagree that we live in a free country. I think we do live in a great country.
Yep.
So yeah, to hear that and to hear him say, I don't worship it, but it does mean something. And so I expect people to respect it, because he literally watched men die and sacrificed his life and has carried something for 60 some years so that we could have those rights and those freedoms.
Yeah.
And I do think that demands an element of respect. So yeah, I think he puts it really well. I really do.
Yeah. I thought it was, the image was great, and his commentary on it was incredible. Let's see, there's a bunch of stuff. Readjusting to civilian life. That was something that he talked a lot about. Was that process of readjusting when he came home and went through a series of jobs before he finally ended up in the job that he did. That's a huge issue. Again, in our organization, we deal with combat trauma and trauma related issues, and a lot of that trauma is related to combat. A lot of it's just related to life. But honestly, a lot of it is related to separating out of the military and dealing with the loss of the camaraderie and the brotherhood and those connections and, meaningful service and focused work and all of that. People separate out of that and don't know how to behave and don't know how to live and don't know how to make decisions. And it's a huge challenge for so many folks. I've said this many times. We've had Vietnam veterans attend our program. We've had, veterans for many wars. There is a common thread that ties all service members together. It's crazy to hear, someone at your grandfather's stage of life talk about some of the struggles that he had coming back home and separating out of the military and trying to, find work and keep work. But that seemed like a major conflict isn't the right word, but a major obstacle for him to deal with, for him to overcome. But it seems like he continued to live a life and build a family, and he did well, but it took him a while to get to the place where he did.
Yeah. Absolutely. Do you want me to speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, please.
I think one of the things, again, I don't want to talk through every scene in the film because I would love people to watch it and enjoy it. But yeah, I just think he felt like, what is my purpose?
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've wrestled with that as well, coming
Sure.
back and, discovering like, okay, I just went, literally my life was in danger every single day. I had an assignment, the military has very strict assignments, orders, somebody telling what to do every day. And then if you're in any sort of leadership position, which he was, and you go back to a place where people are bossing you around and they have no idea what you've been through, it probably feels very disrespectful and very degrading, I would imagine.
That's right. Absolutely right.
Being cut off in traffic, or somebody just the like I can imagine that. Like I can imagine that. And so I think that's what he wrestled with the most. He talks about the, trying to be a janitor at the school and the teacher disrespected him and just different things like that. Yep. So yeah, I think it's a big deal. I think that's why it's important to recognize every time I hear that someone served in the military, I thank them and I honor that, because I don't know those sacrifices. I don't know. I know that I get to live in a free country because somebody did that for me. So I think it's really, really important. But yeah, he wrestled with it a lot. And I it's kind of funny to hear some of the stories about it. He told a lot more different stories about that didn't make it into the film. It's really funny because he just has a funny sense of humor. But then, yeah, on top of that, I mean, the little things like how fast they drove and planes flying overhead, everything. It would just make him. I got the opportunity while I was making this film. The movie American Sniper came out.
Oh, right.
And that was just very insightful for me too, because I think they did a good job of capturing the going back and forth on deployments and kind of the things we wrestled with and the correlation of stuff. It's I don't know, I can't imagine that.
Yeah, I tell the story sometimes about when I came home from Iraq. About 30 days later, I was on a church staff here locally. So I went from being an infantry officer to working on a church staff. And I always make the joke that I went from like being involved in taking over a country to trying to beg volunteers to clean the bathroom on Saturday night.
That is hilarious. Absolutely.
And yeah, just that separation. Like, why doesn't anyone understand what I've done or where I've been? And again, your grandfather said it. You just feel alone, and man, you do feel alone. And it's a crazy feeling that you can't explain because you're not alone, but you feel really alone.
Absolutely.
And man, what a tough thing. And then he gave great advice. Again, I'm talking through some of this, but everyone needs to watch the movie. His great advice. What's that?
I was looking something up for you that I wanted to share with you too. Keep going.
Yeah, his great advice was, what do you say to someone that's separating out of the military? You need to have the Lord. Talk about that one for a minute. What's your grandfather's faith?
So
describe that, because he mentioned that several times. That exact phrase, in fact.
Yeah,
you need to have the Lord.
Yep. So, one of the things, man, I was so excited, and we'll talk about this at some point during the interview here. One of the reasons I was so excited about partnering with you guys and getting to come on the show with you is I love that you take the hope that we have in Jesus, and you're using that to help families that are walking through this stuff, because that is exactly what he talks about. He grew up a Lutheran boy, but he said that he really met Jesus when he was 17, I think, because he met my grandma, and he just saw there was something different about her. She was a Baptist girl, but she was serious about it, and there was something different about her. And so he put his trust in Jesus through a conversation with her. And so he's 18 years old. Then he goes and enlists in the Army, and he writes about having a Christian faith. And he grew up in a home where they talked about God and things like that. But I think it became personal to him. So a personal relationship with the Lord. And so when he says the Lord all the time, he's talking about his walk with Christ. And so he's talking about his reliance on the Bible, his reliance on God, that when he's in the middle of a situation in the middle of the night and he's wondering if he's going to get his throat cut while he's sleeping, he is praying, God, give me peace. I don't know the length at that point in his walk with the Lord, if he had scripture memorized or whatever, but I just know that, as a Christian myself and as a pastor, that's what I'd be doing, is I would be begging for that peace, because it's the only place who's going to get it. And coming home, so he said, like, hey, I had my wife, I had the Lord, I had my family, and that was it. And he was very involved in the church. He served all the time. He was a deacon, and he sang in the choir and did all kinds of things. And him and my grandma would reach out to people in the community. Anytime he was having a bad day, she would pull him aside, love on him, pray together, just hold him tight, and just be there for him. So when he says the Lord, he's talking about a personal relationship with Jesus. So,
And that was the second part, was with your partner. So, what do you say? You must have the Lord. But then he talked about your partner. You need to have a close relationship with your partner. It sounds like he and your grandmother had an incredible relationship.
They did. They were never apart. They were the type of people that when they answered the phone, they would either be like this, and they would both be sharing,
right, or
it'd be, hold on, I'm going to the kitchen to pick up the phone, so they could be on the phone together. So if you're talking to one of them, you're talking to both of them, and I've always loved that. It's just so funny. My brother were talking yesterday because we did a little release party and watched the movie again together, and she passed away in 2011, and it's just crazy the impact we can have on legacy. And I just love that. And I think for them together, I think he would tell you that he wishes he talked about it more with her, that he would be more honest with her about like what he was thinking through and the dreams he was having and the nightmares. But I don't think it really mattered, because I think she was just present. So she didn't have to have all the answers. She would try to protect him. Hey, Dad needs some time.
Yeah.
Grandpa needs some time. And she would just be a barrier for him. She would be a helpmate to him. And I think um, them having the Lord together, I'm sure it wasn't easy. I'm sure there were days where it was like, why can't you just get over this thing? It's been 10 years. It's been 20 years. It's been 30 years. Like, why can't you just, but I never saw personally that's the other way I know it was protected, because I grew up, as their grandkid. I never saw most of this.
Right.
And so they did a really good job. I mean, I could tell when he was on edge, and some of my older cousins will tell me like, hey, yeah, we remember some times when Grandpa would, and I knew he didn't want to go to fireworks. That was like the extent of it.
Yeah. Right.
But she did a good job protecting him, honoring him.
Yeah.
And if he needed to be alone, he went and got alone. And she said, hey, Grandpa doesn't feel good. And we would never know otherwise.
Yeah.
So I think she was there for him. She was a layer of protection for him.
We, again, work with a lot of families, and a lot of the things that we deal with would be the marital relationships, and, the divorce rates amongst those who have served in combat is incredible. We have a program for spouses who are married to someone who's been in combat, and trying to help them work through some of this. And a lot of those folks perhaps would be watching this show. Describe your grandmother's faith a little bit, and kind of what motivated her. Obviously, for her to be able to support your grandfather the way that she did for as long as she did, means there was a depth there, something that she had, that she leaned on or relied on.
Mm-hmm. So we would go up to Minnesota and visit my grandparents 2 or 3 times a year, but we never missed church. Never. We were with them like Sunday morning, we're going to church. We were staying 2 services. We were going to this, Sunday school. Like, we were there, and we'd always come home and have ham, and we always prayed together.
Right.
You knew that they were about spiritual things. You knew they were about biblical things. And I knew that they served as children's ministry leaders, and that they were just involved. They made being the church, like, they made it what they were about in this small community they were in Minnesota. And that just never wavered.
Yeah.
Like I said, I cannot remember a time where we didn't go up there and we weren't doing something involved actively in the body of believers they had up there. So it was a big deal to her, and we always knew that. And so there's no, again, I wasn't around, and probably
Right.
wasn't even known most of the conversations that they had in and around that, the specifics of the war stuff. My mom would say things occasionally, but she was there for him every time. Every time he woke up in the middle of the night with a nightmare, she was the one rubbing his back and praying for him and being there with him. And I don't know any other version of her.
It's that authentic faith that led him into a relationship with Christ. Seeing that in her, it was authentic throughout the rest of her life, and
absolutely,
and she served. So then your grandfather, as he was talking about this, he broke this into 2 parts. So what do you need to have, or what do you say to someone who's separating out of the military? You must have the Lord. Your partner's really, really important. But then the second part was, and the relationship with your family is also important.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't tie the relationship with your partner and your family together, which I think is great. Years ago, I was in a Sunday school class for young married couples, and I remember the teacher saying, for those of you that don't have children, you're not waiting to start your family. When you got married, you started your family. That's your family. That relationship should be the most important relationship you have outside of your relationship with God.
Absolutely.
But then you also add to that family. And I think that's probably what he was talking about. Can you talk about that a little bit? His relationship with his kids and his grandkids, and the legacy that he left.
Yeah. So grandma was number one. We always knew that. They were inseparable. They did everything together, and it was great. I admire that. If I could have, I'm trying to get emotional with you, but if I could have the marriage that they had, I'd be doing half of it. I'd be doing something right. So, and again, they committed to the right things. They were simple. He told me when they got married, they were going to do their money God's way. And so that meant he got $50 a week. He tithed 5, he saved 5, and they lived off the 40. Yeah. And he said all their friends would go out for steak dinners, and they stayed home and had peanut butter and jelly. He said, but now they're at a place where they're giving an inheritance without sharing his financial information. Like, they're giving inheritance to their kids and their grandkids because they did it right from a young age. And so they knew what they were investing in. They knew what they wanted to build. I don't think in any way did they have things figured out. I think they stood on on the covenants they made with God, and then they walk through it. And I think the Lord honors that. People call it karma. It's called reaping and sowing. That's
Right.
the
Right.
Bible. What you sow. So they sowed savings, and therefore they had money. They sowed into their family, therefore they had a great family. Not a single one of her grandkids missed her funeral from all over the country.
Wow.
And they had, I think it's 12 total grandkids. They have 4 children, 12 grandchildren. I think that's right. And we're a tight family. And again, they love and the reason he talks about the kids so much is they're very close to their kids, all of them, in different ways, but close to all of them. They always wanted things to be fair. They always wanted to make sure everyone felt a part no matter what. And you always knew that. There was very little, I'm not going to say no family drama. Every family has drama, but very little gossiping and backbiting. It was like when the family got together, we were all going to be there.
Yeah.
And so that's what I got to see, growing up. And my mom's the youngest of their kids, so I was we were the younger cousins. But even I remember, my big cousins were the ones that we were playing with and hanging out with. So we just had a tight family.
Yeah.
But grandma was always number one. And that's something that, I've been able to see now being a pastor and a dad and a husband is my relationship with my wife has to be number one.
Yeah.
Because my kids are your kids in your home is temporary.
Yeah.
People stay together for the kids. Well,
Yeah.
kids are going to leave one day.
Right.
If you're doing it right.
You're doing it right. Yeah.
They're going to leave one day at some point, and that is temporary, and they're not yours. They're the Lord's. They're yours to steward for a season.
Yeah.
And so building your life around your kids, that is going to crumble.
Yeah.
The kids can be a terrible idol. They can be great, and I don't want to disrespect people and their children.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
But they are not meant to be the foundation of our family. Me and my wife and our relationship with the Lord is our foundation, and He had that right. I would definitely say that they had that right. So.
Yeah, we raised our kids to send them out of the house, not
That's
to
right.
keep them there, keep them there forever, right? And that's the truth. Was it hard to, as someone who loves your granddad, was it hard to do some of these interviews when he was struggling so much to talk about them?
Oh yeah, I felt bad. Like I felt guilty almost because I was
like you were pushing him into something he didn't want to do or something.
Yeah, I wrestled with that a lot because I asked him about it. Before, and I was like, I really would like to tell this. I remember the first time, in 2012, when we did kind of the first little sit down, almost nobody's seen any of that footage because that was kind of like my initial, just kind of spent time with him. And I remember the first time he cracked saying we didn't have enough ammunition. And I was like, oh, I was like, let's just turn it off. It can be done. He's like, no. Like, I want to talk about it. I said I would do it. Let's do it. And I remember feeling so terrible because, again, that's probably why I went from filmmaking into being more of a pastor. I knew this was going to make a really good movie because of what it was going to create.
Emotion. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And his realness, but I also knew he needed care in that moment. And so it was really tough for me to be like, so there are some parts, like if you watched it all the way through, where I literally say, hey, let's take a break. We're going to go get a cup of coffee. We're going to go whatever. Or I'd ask people to leave. Like, try to get as few people as possible in the room. There's like 2 camera guys, an audio guy, and my wife was taking notes, and then one of the camera guys' wives was taking pictures. So that was it. There's just 6 of us in the room. I tried to make it as simple as we could. But I also knew. So even there's some points in the film where I just kind of use creative license, and I remember that too, Grandpa. And he'd say, well, Grandma. So you can clearly tell we're having a conversation. I think that plays into the story. So yes, I felt bad, but I just know, man, so many families are going to watch this. I hope as many as possible. I'd love as many as possible. One of the things actually I tell you, I'm really excited. Last night we did a little release party, and I offered some DVDs in advance for people. And for everyone that was bought, I said that they paid double so that we could send you guys a free copy that you can give away to families. So
awesome.
We got a box of, I think, 25 DVDs I'm going to send your way that y'all can just hand out to minister to families and stuff. And if you want more, I can get you more too. But
yeah, very cool. I want to talk about our partnership here in just a minute, but
okay, yeah.
When I got the email with the screener on it, I watched it and I sent a response back to Michael, our marketing director, and Chad, our founder, and said I loved it, and I'm going to make my kids watch it because it was that good and they need to watch it. It was incredible, and I really think that a lot of people need to see it play out. So redemption is a word we use in Christianity a lot.
Yeah.
And it has a really large theological meaning to it. But I really believe that redemption happens when we use a brokenness, whether it's a broken past or something broken in us, when we use that for the benefit of the blessing of someone else. We've
Absolutely.
redeemed what's broken, right? That's what Christ did for us. We've redeemed it to a purpose that is valuable. And really watching your grandfather talk about this in such an authentic way, there's so much redemption in his story because there are so many people that are going to be helped by it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think that's when I knew that that God's hand was on it. Like when we watched, like I said, we did this original little interview back in 2012, and when it was done, I don't know when the moment hit me, but I was like, as many people as possible, especially military families and kids and grandkids of veterans, especially who've been actively deployed, need to hear this, because he has tapped into something when it comes to his relationship with the Lord. Yeah. Not many people go 60 years with undiagnosed PTSD, which is exactly what it was, and live to have that type of legacy.
Yeah.
And I know the statistics you're saying, all that stuff like that is true. I've seen that in my own pastoral ministry, just relationships, friends, everything. And it's unbelievable to get to hear that. And so I think as many people can see that as possible, the story of redemption is throughout all of creation. It's something everyone identifies with. Hey, there is this mess, and God's going to take it and use it for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And so that is such a good gift and not easy. It requires work, especially this side of eternity. We've got a lot to do to understand that into our mindsets. But this horrible thing, that he was a part of, that I have no, think about it. I have no idea how his relationship with the Lord grew, or where he was at, where I would be today, where my family would be today, where my mom and, my dad would be today. Like that. That's a really big deal. So absolutely.
It's a huge deal. People ask us, organizationally, how we have the success that we do, and how we're able to minister to the people that we're able to minister to. There are a lot of aspects of that I could talk about, but probably the most powerful thing that we do is we lead everything with story, with testimony. Every person that teaches a class as a part of one of our programs has attended our sessions, our programs as a student. They found some direction, some help, and some hope, and maybe renewed a relationship with Christ or entered into a relationship with Christ. And they stand in front of a group of guys, men or women, and they tell their story. This is where I was. This is what's happened. And this is what God's doing in my life. And this is how I'm moving forward. The transparency that comes from that, but probably more specifically, the walls that come down because of it, man, it's incredible. There's nothing more powerful to remove the walls that we all hide behind than an authentic story, particularly one that really hurts to tell. It gains attention. It demands attention. And it's powerful. Yeah, it's really powerful.
Yep. The story of Joseph, what the enemy meant for evil, God can always use for good. And there's nothing better than a personal testimony. I completely agree.
That's right. When you went to Washington and you went to the Korean War Memorial, again, great storytelling there, and the video footage obviously is incredible. Had your grandfather ever been to that before?
No, that was one of the other crazy things. Is he honestly, he refused to go for many, many years.
Oh wow.
My mom actually was there for something she was doing. I don't even know why she was up there, but she went and stopped by. She's like, well, Grandpa was in this war, or my dad was in this war. I'm going to look at this. And she realized, like, I don't want to give away the reveal of the movie, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a point when you're like, holy cow, like this is a really big deal that we went to this memorial. And you need to see it. It's unbelievable. And so, they had asked him, they do these honor flights. Would you ever want to go do an honor flight? We can get you on one of those, or we can take you with a group of guys up there. We can go as a family. And I think just something about same reason he never opened those letters, the same reason he never really wanted to talk about it much. It just felt like that's in the past. It hurt real bad. I don't. I mean, at this point, he's still he's still having nightmares.
Yeah.
Where they're. I think in the interview he said they're down to a couple times a month rather than 3 or 4 times a week.
Wow.
So he's had this with him his entire life. So the thought of like, when he would go see a psychiatrist or they would try to talk to him about it at the VA, it would just make it worse. And so in his mind, it's suppress this thing, get rid of it. But I think what we've seen, what I've seen in him, I'm not with him every day, but what I've seen in him is he's done more interviews since then. He's had kids from the local high school come up and talk to him about the war. He's opened up more. I know personally of a young man that he counseled who was an Army Ranger.
Yeah.
I think it's been therapeutic telling his story, and why I would push for it is what the enemy keeps in the dark, he can keep shame and regret and all these things. And when you bring it to the light, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we can deal with this now. And you realize, oh, this person brings that to the light. They've struggled with the same thing. Exactly like you said. I always wrestled with the idea of war myself because of this, and here's how I reconciled it. Oh, and then I heard another person say that. Yeah. Now I feel like I can grab onto something. That's the power of community.
Yes.
So stay isolated and stay alone. That's where the enemy can bring a lot of shame, and that's where those walls come up. I don't want anyone to know that.
We have veteran suicide rates that we talk about. The number that everyone uses is 22. The most recent report says it's probably closer to 20, maybe 21. Whatever the number is, it's too much. And it's probably much more than even what's reported. One of the interesting things about
veterans, is that what you're saying?
Veterans, yes.
Okay.
But one of the very interesting things about those statistics is that when we think about veteran suicide, we think of guys in their 20s or 30s coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. Something like 60% of those veterans who commit suicide are 50 or older. So these aren't young veterans, these are older veterans. And I think it goes back to exactly what you just said. They've been carrying the guilt, the shame, whatever. They've been carrying it for decades, and they finally get to a point where they just can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And the blessing of being able to talk about it, it takes it out in the open. It, whatever's rolling around in your head, you get it out to where you have to process it, you have to deal with it. And as you're dealing with it, it becomes a help to others, and you realize it's not what you've made it out to be in your brain.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never would have even thought that. That makes a lot of sense, because if you're young and strapping and you come back, I can muscle through it, but you carry that for years and years and years.
For years, right?
Wow.
At the end of the day, when all is said and done, what would be your big hope for this documentary? If you have, this is my one goal, this is what I want to happen.
Yeah.
What would that be?
It's crazy. I went to school to be a filmmaker, and then got out of that, and God called me to being a pastor. Still got to end up making a film. Not just make a film, but like one of my producers told me, Darrin, it's a really big deal that you have a distributor. Like this movie's going to be sold. That doesn't happen for people who went to film school and try to be a filmmaker their whole life.
Sure.
So I'm like, well, okay. So I know that it's something the Lord wants to do, and He has. And my dream would be that, partnering with you guys was already a huge answer to prayer.
Yeah.
The fact that families could watch this, they could get the hope of Jesus, they could hear an incredible testimony. And on top of it, I think learning about the war and all that stuff, I think that's important. I think there's good components all over when it comes to that film. So the goal for me is not to get rich, make a bunch of money, anything like that. It really is just to see as many people as possible transformed by the hope of Jesus that I think comes through this story. And I've showed it to some families that their dad was in the Korean War and they're no longer with them, and they said, "Oh man!" And you can just see the tears in their eyes. Like, now I get it. Like, now I understand what Dad was talking about. I understand what Dad didn't talk about. Like, I get this. I remember he said the same thing. I talked to one guy recently. He said, "My grandpa always said he wanted to sleep on the top bunk on the ship."
Oh.
Literally, and I was like, I know exactly why he didn't want to get pooped on. And it was one of the exact same things. And so it's just cool. I think it unites a community. I think of people. There's entire Facebook groups of children of Korean War vets that most of them, they put a picture up and say, "I have no idea what happened to my dad. Can you help me?" So I think it's, to me, the big win is as many people as possible can watch this, be blessed by it, especially military families, which you guys are doing. I'd love for you guys to put it in the hands of as many families as possible.
Yeah.
Just they can get a glimpse of hope. Like, this guy finished well, and your past doesn't have to define your future, and the story of redemption, and all of that. So
that's awesome. Yeah. You reached out to us, in the process of all of this, and said you wanted to partner. Man, what a blessing for us that, you've done the work, and man, you're looking outside of yourself and outside of, your own circle and asking, how can this be used in a greater way? And it's such an honor for us to be able to be a part of that, which I say partner, you're doing all the work. So we're not a great partner, but we're doing, whatever we need to do to certainly broadcast it, and we'll get it out and do what we can. But man, what a blessing to be able to partner with you and your grandfather and his story. Tell those who are listening or watching where they can learn about the movie, learn about you, where they need to go.
Yeah. So the movie is available tomorrow. I don't know specifically what time. I think technically at like 2 a.m. tonight sometime. So
give the date.
July 16th. Yeah. Tomorrow, July 16th, Tuesday. And it's going to be available on every HD digital platform you could get. So iTunes, which is now called Apple TV. Interestingly enough, that has changed. So it's Apple TV, Google Play, Amazon. You can also order DVDs on Amazon. You can order DVDs in a lot of places. I saw Target Online has them.
Cool.
You can order it directly from Virgil Films, distributor. You can also get it on Vudu, I believe, Vimeo on demand, and all that's available on our website, unforgottenmovie.com. You can go there. We have a Facebook page you can like and share to let people know about it. You can see more about kind of me, my grandfather, behind the scenes stuff, photos, all that stuff. Facebook's probably where we put the most of our effort as far as the content and keeping things up to date. So
very cool. We'll put all that on our social platforms as well. So hopefully people will get it. Thanks for the conversation, man. We'll talk more, of course, but really, really appreciate it. Appreciate the work you're doing. Everyone needs to watch the documentary. Like I said, I watched a lot of documentaries, but rarely do I go, my kids need to watch this and my family needs to watch this. It's just that important. And I really do think it's important. So thanks for doing it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeremy. I appreciate the phone call and hanging out. It's awesome.
Well, appreciate it. Thanks, man. We'll talk again. Thank you for watching the show. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have not yet subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe link, hit the bell so you can be notified when new episodes come online. If you're listening over at our partner at Mojo 50, jump over to YouTube and check out the show there. You can look for the Mighty Oak Show. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.